If you didn't think that it would be remotely controversial for a presidential candidate seeking to garner votes to go on one of the most popular mediums on the internet to solicit votes and to expound on his message at length, unconstrained by the typical impositions of corporate media, you would be wrong, because people are for some reason today complaining about the fact that Bernie Sanders went on the Joe Rogan podcast yesterday. And let's just unpack some of the tediousness here, because I think it actually is worth addressing on its face. Otherwise, some of these talking points and some of this mentality gets mainstreamed, and that has a downstream effect on everybody. So the first thing is that it's horrible for Bernie Sanders to go on Joe Rogan because Joe Rogan is somehow alt-right, or he's a platform for the alt-right. Please. Joe Rogan, yes, has amplified the message of certain people that are associated with the alt-right by virtue of him having them on his show. But my reading of Joe Rogan has always just been that Joe Rogan basically has anybody on that he finds interesting. It's not as if there is a strategic calculus where he's thinking to himself, you know what? I'm going to bolster the alt-right surreptitiously by having X, Y, or Z individual on the show, and I want to mainstream their ideology, and I really want to have an effect on the political discussion in that respect. No. I think Joe Rogan is just sort of an observer, and if somebody comes onto his radar that he thinks might be intriguing, he has them on. It's really almost that simple. I don't want to overly psychoanalyze, but that's always really been my takeaway for the, 6-7 years that I've occasionally, watched the show or listened to it. And so for people to overinterpret Rogan's political motive is so absurd. Does he have certain inclinations that are right or libertarian leaning? Sure, but so do millions and millions of Americans, so who cares? And, Joe Rogan often fuses that with some, left-wing inclinations, and it's a hodgepodge of sensibilities that kind of coagulate into a somewhat ill-defined and scattershot worldview. And that's just how many Americans operate. Many voters operate. So it wouldn't be unusual. And the idea that in order to go on the show, you're somehow endorsing everything they've ever done, that's also an insidious mentality that ends up being used to delegitimize dialogue and engagement. I've experienced that myself. Whenever I go on Fox News, it automatically gets construed as me endorsing everything that's ever been done on Fox News. Really? I've been on CNN, actually, in the past, and nobody made that allegation with regard to CNN. Nobody says that if you were on NPR, which I have been, that means you're somehow endorsing the entire body of work that has appeared on NPR. Of course not. That's just wildly untenable as a standard. So the only time that the standard is invoked is when people want to advance a particular political agenda, usually in the process of delegitimizing or stigmatizing the very notion of engagement with people on good faith. And I believe in good faith engagement. I'm going to continue doing it. I am now sort of equipped with the rebuttals that are necessary to be aware of when people try to use that engagement as a guilt by association smear. I don't agree that that smear is legitimate. I never will. So there you have it. And I would think that Bernie Sanders probably has a similar mentality. Remember, it was Bernie Sanders who not only appeared on Fox News, he collaborated with Fox News for an hour-long town hall specifically to further his political interests. So that's way more tangible of an association with Fox News than for example, I've ever had as just somebody who appears on as a guest occasionally. But I think Bernie's mentality is the correct one. There are people listening to the Joe Rogan podcast who probably know who Bernie is, but haven't heard him expound at length on the various planks of his political program. And if they do hear Bernie talking about these issues, it's usually when Bernie's like yelling at a rally or something or at a debate. And although that is endearing at times, there are also other occasions when you simply want to hear in a relaxed format Bernie kind of calmly and dispassionately lay out the various initiatives that he's running on. And I thought Joe Rogan did a really great job facilitating that. Joe Rogan's not a journalist, right? So I wouldn't expect him to be armed with every possible criticism that he can level at Bernie. I would expect him to just kind of use his instincts to maybe question premises now and then, but for the most part, simply give Bernie the ability to talk at length in a format that is unconstrained. And as Bernie mentioned in the outset of the podcast, which everybody should listen to, the format that is inherent to these televised debates is kind of demeaning. The notion that you can reduce all of your prescriptions for healthcare or immigration or foreign policy to a 45-second soundbite, it almost is inextricably connected to a degradation of American political discourse writ large. Now, I understand that the DNC is in a bizarre position where they have to manage 20-plus candidates. You know, it's actually 25 candidates, believe it or not. So there are no easy solutions, but nonetheless, it makes it all the more important that candidates have a forum where they're not bound by those arbitrary restrictions. They're not bound by a corporate structure orchestrating the debates, which is what's been done thus far in terms of CNN and MSNBC having sole editorial control over the content and layout of the first two debates. And so the idea that anybody would complain about this, it strikes me as just totally bizarre and disconnected from the reality of the world, where people are politically engaged, I think, to an unusual degree at the moment, and they want real engagement. They want real information. They want unfettered information. And they don't want everything filtered through this antiquated and obsolete format, which is all you get, really, when you watch the boob tube. So, I am in favor of Bernie Sanders appearing on Joe Rogan. Tulsi has obviously done it not once, but twice. Fun fact, Tulsi was the first sitting politician, meaning the first elected official in office to appear on the Joe Rogan podcast when she first went on last September. Gary Johnson was on in 2016 when he was running as a libertarian for president. And then Yang was on earlier this year as well. So it's just a no-brainer if you're somebody who wants to promulgate a message to go on the Joe Rogan podcast. And the idea that anybody would be upset about this says more about them than it does about Joe or the candidate who is appearing on the show. And I, for one, believe that Joe Rogan should replace the Chuck Todds and the Jake Tappers of the world and moderate the next debate. Live stream it. They can throw it to Jamie every now and then for a research update or whatever. Maybe have some random comedian for relief at times. And who knows, if it's in a state where it's legal, bring in some MJ and let everybody chill out a little bit. All right. Talk to you later.